Good morning, everybody. Fond du Lac County District Attorney and the Republican candidate for Wisconsin Attorney General Eric Toney is our very special guest today, Thursday, August 18th, 2022. For DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden, and this is the first time that you're watching one of our shows. Welcome. We do these shows every week with candidates running for political office in a relaxed, casual style format. It's a chance to get to know the person, not just the candidate. You can watch a recording of all of our previous live shows on our website at DrydenWire.com, our Facebook page, which is just at DrydenWire, or on our YouTube channel, which is simply youtube.com/DrydenWire. Looking ahead, next Thursday, August 25th, Democrat candidate for Wisconsin's 28th Assembly District, Patty Schachner, will be joining us for a chat. And 2 weeks from today, on September 1st, Democrat candidate for Wisconsin's 30th Assembly District, Sarah Yakub, will be our guest, so we can get to know her a little bit. But today we're chatting with Fond du Lac County District Attorney and the Republican candidate for Wisconsin Attorney General. That's a lot to say. Eric Toney. Eric, good morning, man. How are you?
I'm doing good, Ben. How are you this morning?
I'm fantastic. This is great.
Wonderful.
I love getting to know new people. I just totally do. I know it sounds so corny, but I absolutely do. So thanks for coming on. And congratulations on your primary win.
Well, thank you. I know, great to be on, and thank you. We had some great candidates in the race, and one of them is certainly up in your neck of the woods, Adam Jarkow, who I really enjoyed getting to know on the campaign trail. We certainly beat each other up a little bit, but we really had a very nice relationship on the trail, and I'm looking forward to earning the votes of those that supported others in the race as we are sprinting to November to retire Josh Call.
Yeah, so obviously, we should get into a little bit about Josh Call, why you're running for Attorney General, why people should vote for you, etc. But because this is the first time you have been on our show, as always, we want to get to know the person a little bit. So before we get into the politics stuff, tell us about you. Where did you grow up?
So I was born and raised in Fond du Lac, and I've lived basically my entire life until going to college at St. Norbert. I ran cross country and track while I was there. I like to think I was about an average Division III runner, and then went to law school in the Twin Cities. And when I was in college, I was in our college Republicans. I chaired our law school Republicans in the Twin Cities. And then after law school, I decided I wasn't going to be a lawyer. So you can imagine how proud my parents were.
All right, well, slow down. Hold on a second. You can't gloss over that. So you go to law school. I'm assuming law school isn't free. It's a pretty big cost. And then you're like, I guess I don't want to do it. You didn't, at no point during law school where you're like, I don't think this is for me. I should just stop now. But you waited until you were finished and went, not for me.
Well, I definitely had those thoughts, but my dad had an over 30-year career in law enforcement, retired with our sheriff's office, and I'd always wanted to be a cop as a kid, but he really didn't want me to get into that profession given the challenges that we see our law enforcement go. He wanted me to have a different direction, but it always stuck with me. So when I was in law school, I wanted to get into federal law enforcement, and a law school degree is something that can help you get into federal law enforcement. So I was in some of those application processes going through the tail end of law school, but I was managing a specialty running store in Minnesota selling running shoes and equipment for a bit. And then an opportunity came up with a good friend of mine at the time. His dad was going to be running for Congress in the 8th here in Wisconsin to unseat Steve Kagan. And so I quit my job, studied 3 weeks for the Wisconsin bar exam, and then parachuted back into Green Bay, which is basically where I had lived for 4 years, with St. Norbert being in De Pere, just outside of Green Bay, and worked on that congressional campaign for a bit, and then made my way back to Fond du Lac in private practice for about 2.5 years before I decided to run for district attorney. And when I was in private practice, I did juvenile law, mental health, a little bit of bankruptcy practice, and as my dad was not probably too thrilled, mostly criminal defense work. So my dad would arrest them and I would represent them on the back end. So,
well, let's circle back here if I can. So your dad was a cop for almost 30 years in which county?
Fond du Lac County, with our sheriff's office, and just a little bit with the North Fond du Lac Police Department before that.
So, and I know you kind of touched on this, that your dad didn't want you to go into it, but you said you wanted. So you wanted to be a cop, right? And your dad said, no, I don't think you should. And you're like, okay. Or was it like an argument, or you kind of agreed with him, but you still wanted to be in that, I don't know, what are they, law and order field? Like, I still can be a part of the justice system, but with, likely not to be shot when I go to work.
There was never any argument. It was just something, I would maybe bring up on occasion, and my dad would just kind of suggest, something else. I mean, I know, Ben, your dad was in law enforcement for a long time, and we know it's the day in and day out, the emotional toll, working third shift, the things that they see, being away from your family, missing sporting events, those kind of things where, I can't think of a more noble profession than being a police officer. But my dad wanted me to have a different life. And it wasn't something that he ever pushed on me, but it was just, discussions that we would have from time to time. But I always wanted to be in that public safety realm in one way or another. And one of my best friends, his dad was a lawyer who's a judge now in Fond du Lac County. And we were born about 2 weeks apart. They lived behind us growing up. And so I think I kind of merged those two things together, my dad's career and his, when I ultimately got elected district attorney.
And then you said federal law enforcement. Is that like FBI? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, so this one, I wanted to get in with the FBI. That was my ultimate career goal, but this was 2009, 10, so federal law enforcement really wasn't hiring at the time. So everybody's favorite federal agency was one of the few that was actually hiring at the time. And it's one of those 3-letter agencies, and it's called the IRS. So I was going through the interview process to be a criminal investigator with them, and it was the best job that I never got. And I remember doing all the interviews and everything, and I wanted to lateral over to the FBI. But I'm so glad that my career path took a different turn as we follow God's path. You never know where it will lead you. But right. I get to prosecute cases right now in the community that I was born and raised to keep my family, my friends, and their family safe. And it's really special for me.
Yeah. Plus, you don't want people to hate you.
I don't know what's worse, IRS or a criminal defense attorney sometimes. But.
Yeah, so let's speak on that as well. So you went into criminal defense. Your dad, was he still a cop when you became a criminal? You took criminal cases as a defense attorney?
Yeah, so he actually, we got to work together for about 6 months once I was the district attorney, which are some of my fondest memories. We'd actually be in court together a few times, and that was really nice. But so, yeah, I was doing criminal defense while my dad was still a police officer. But one of the things that was such valuable experience, because I'd actually be sitting across from my clients having these very candid conversations. And now I don't call them clients, we call them defendants. And the conversations were really striking to me, because sometimes, Fond du Lac is about an hour from the Milwaukee area, 2.5 hours from Chicago, depending on the traffic. And so we would get a number of people that would be coming up from some of those areas that would have committed crimes down there that are now committing crimes in Fond du Lac. And they would sometimes wonder, why do you seem to care about this here when they didn't care about it down there, which was a reflection on the limited law enforcement resources, where Milwaukee police need more cops on the streets. And they would say, well, if I could get away with it there, why can't I get away with it here? And we're really seeing that full circle with the type of crime we're seeing in Milwaukee now, where the Milwaukee police are even more under-resourced and understaffed, and people are literally getting away with murders, shootings, violent crime, vehicle thefts, the reckless driving. And if they do it there, they think they can get away with it anywhere in Wisconsin. And so we're seeing that Milwaukee crime and drug epidemic literally bleeding across our state right now.
So when you were a defense attorney, your dad was still a cop in the same county, right?
Yes.
Did you look for cases? Like if somebody said, "Hey, I want to hire you to be, to represent me," and do you look right away to see if your dad's on it? Because I totally want to drill him or grill him on the stand.
Yeah, that'd be some fun cross-examination.
That would have been awesome.
So my dad was a patrol sergeant at the time, day shift, and so he did a lot more administrative things.
Okay,
and
boring.
He very much enjoyed the weekends when he'd be working, where he could actually get out in the squad and drive around. But he wasn't on many of the cases at that point, so we didn't have to worry about that, and he didn't have to worry about me cross-examining him.
All right. So how did you end up being the district attorney? So you're a defense attorney, you're private practice at this point, and you just woke up and said, you know what, I think I'm going to be district attorney. Was there somebody already in the place and you said, I feel like it's not being done the right way? And also, isn't there a lot more money in defense attorneys? That's what I see on, movies and stuff, and you hear about that. Defense attorneys can make a lot more. Public office, not so much. Why in the world did you decide to, one, leave defense and go to the prosecution side, and two, why district attorney?
Well, prosecuting was always kind of, I'd interned in the DA's office for 2 summers here in Fond du Lac when I was in law school. So I had been in the office. I had a bit of a grasp on what the job was. Not, I mean, 2 summers is not enough to fully understand the job, but I kind of knew the generalities. And in the 2011, we were at our bar association Christmas party, and I was talking with one of other attorneys in the area, and we were just talking about the current DA and some dissatisfaction that some people had. And so we were kind of joking that I should run for district attorney. And I just laughed because I was 27 at the time, literally, no joke, living in my dad's basement. I had moved back not too long before that.
So you're a cliche at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like this just doesn't
drop
make
out
any
of college, not drop out. I'm sorry. Don't go into your career and then live in my parents' basement.
Yeah, so
That's awesome.
But, so then I spent the entire weekend thinking about this. I'm like, I've seen the change in crime issues from when I was growing up to what we're seeing now, and some other concerns that I was hearing about the incumbent. And so I thought about it the whole weekend. And so I go to talk to my dad. I think it was that Sunday night, and I'm like, Dad, I'm thinking about running for district attorney. And we talked for about 5 minutes. He's got to work first shift in the morning, and he said, let's talk about it tomorrow. So the next day rolls around, and we connect after work. I'm like, hey, I want to talk about what we talked about last night. And he goes, what did we talk about? And so it was not off to a great start. But he was pretty apprehensive. He'd been, with our sheriff's office, we'd had some pretty contested sheriff's races over the years. And I don't think there's anything more personal than a sheriff's race in a community, just because of the relationship our sheriffs have with the local communities. And so he was apprehensive about me getting into that type of race. But
hold on a second. If you don't mind, I think I'll forget that part. The apprehensiveness from, it wasn't that you wouldn't be able to do the job or that he wouldn't be proud of you or et cetera. What was the apprehension? Was he concerned that the emotional what was why didn't he, I wouldn't say he didn't want you to, but what was his apprehension specifically?
Yeah. We all know how nasty politics can get and how personal it can get, and vicious at times. And he'd seen that in some of the sheriff's races that he'd been involved in supporting one candidate or another, and just he didn't necessarily want me to have to go through that because he'd seen it from a different perspective. And so it was out of, I think, love and care, that it wasn't that he didn't think it would be a good decision, but it's just the political side of it that we all know can take different tracks from time to time.
Yeah, and so there was an incumbent that you ran against, right?
There was, yes.
Okay, so in sheriff's races, like we just had a couple here in our area, and we do a weekly show, or I do one with Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald. We call it Positive Tuesday Benefits. We've done over 100 of these shows, and we were actually just recently talking about that an incumbent sheriffs are very difficult to, I wouldn't say get out of office, but to defeat, right? Is that same thing? We don't really have a lot of district attorney races in our area. We haven't lately.
Yeah.
Is it the same thing, or no? Actually, it's no different than an assembly seat or something. Obviously, incumbents typically will, data shows, do a little bit better across the board. But our DA's races, pretty much, unless the incumbent does something really dumb, that's their job as long as they want it.
Yeah, not a lot of DAs get challenged. I think, when I got elected, I think we had over 20 new district attorneys that were elected. Not all of them were contested. Some people didn't run. And then I think it was under 10 in the last election, where it can fluctuate pretty heavily from time to time, but it's very difficult to beat an incumbent, and usually there has to be some issue of some sort that gets the public attention. And for me, there were certain issues that I was seeing on the crime side and just some general dissatisfaction, but I hadn't been aware of any big issues when I was making the decision to run. But I just started having conversations with our sheriff, our county executive, anybody I could think of, just waiting for someone to say, you're too young, not yet, not now. And the scary thing is nobody was telling me no, and I was starting to think they were all crazier than I was at that point. But I just kept building relationships, and people that said they might privately support me but wouldn't endorse me, I ended up earning those endorsements from a lot of hard work on, doing my day job, knocking on doors on the evenings and weekends, and just making sure that I could do everything I could to connect with the voters, and ended up winning the primary by about 60-40 against the incumbent. And it's a pretty special feeling when you win an election like that, and a community of 100,000 says I'm the best person to work with our law enforcement to keep our community safe, and that's just a really special honor for me.
And how long now have you been, because you're still the district attorney, how long have you been Fond du Lac County district attorney?
I'm in my 10th year as the district attorney of Fond du Lac County, and
Sure.
I also serve as the president of our Wisconsin District Attorneys Association and have been on our board for about 6 years now, I think.
What do those jobs entail?
So that's a volunteer position. We don't get paid any money, but what we do is work with our legislature if they have different bills that they're looking at that could affect prosecutors, law enforcement, public safety. We give input. We may register in favor, against, or neutral, or not at all on them. We also work with our budget with the state prosecutor's office, and then we have I guess what we call like a criminal justice coalition. So we work with the public defender's office, we work with the courts, and we work with the Department of Justice on kind of a joint budget process to try and have a unified front on what we need or want for the criminal justice system. And so we've had some good results with that, and it's given me some nice insight into the other budget processes for some of our criminal justice partners, including the Department of Justice, which is very important that, with our attorney general's race and winning, to be able to hit the ground running, because we'll be coming up on a biennial budget this coming year.
Yeah, why they do that at the first? All right, you just get elected, you're brand new, and all right, do our entire budget, please. That's ridiculous. I feel like that should be in the off year, but that's neither here nor there. So before we move on to why you decided to run for attorney general, as a district attorney, looking back 10 years, what are you the most proud of?
I really, my dad, getting to work with him a few different times in court was something, really special memory for me. And I could list off the cases that I've worked on, but it's teamwork. It's my support staff, the other prosecutors in my office, and our law enforcement that have helped us get some really great results on cases. And one of the most humbling things as I was, campaigning through the primary here for attorney general, and I'd be around Fond du Lac, and people would just tell me, we don't want to lose you. Just the appreciation. And they say it to me, but it's really a reflection on everybody in my office and our law enforcement. And that stems from really changing the culture in the office. I've now hired or promoted every single person that works in my office, where we've really changed the culture and the trajectory of how we handle cases to be respected by law enforcement in our area, not just here in Fond du Lac County, but other counties. And, that's probably what I'm most proud of, is that work and collaboration that we've done here in Fond du Lac County that I would like to take with me to our Department of Justice and help spread that across Wisconsin. And I know we have many other great DAs and law enforcement that are doing those same things, and that's something that we just want to make sure we're building all across Wisconsin.
How many ADAs did you have 10 years ago, and how many ADAs do you have now?
So we had, I think it was about 8 when I started, and now we're supposed to have 11, technically 12 and a half if you include the pandemic ARPA positions that the governor gave out, which is a whole other story. So they gave out about 45-ish of these positions across Wisconsin, and as of a couple weeks ago, only about a third of them have been filled, and that number may have gone up a bit. But the big reason we haven't been able to fill those and other vacant ADA positions is because of the pay. And with the ARPA positions, the governor had the ability to actually make a difference and allow us to hire above the minimum pay, but he didn't do that. So it's like giving a kid a toy on Christmas without any batteries. You can look at it, it looks kind of nice. You just can't use it. And so that's one of the biggest problems we have across Wisconsin with prosecutors right now. We've got our law enforcement doing amazing things and taking dangerous criminals off the streets, and we need to make sure we're protecting the back end and having great prosecutors throughout Wisconsin. But the starting salary for an ADA right now is about $54,000, and that, when you do 7 years of school, to be in comparison.
Right. Yeah, because that's, I think, and obviously this is different depending on where you live in Wisconsin. And I think it's about a year ago I saw there's around 55,000-ish for a teacher. Don't quote me on that, but I remember it was something like that. And obviously there's some areas that it's like 30 and some, whatever. And they go to, typically 4 years of school. But holy cow, law school. So it's 7 years. And then the cost of law school, that seems a little low, $54,000.
I just heard, to your point on teachers, I think it was in Milwaukee area, it was right around $50,000 that teachers were making there. And we certainly want to make sure our teachers are paid. And that we're getting great teachers. But our number one priority for our budget process next year is going to be raising the starting pay of our assistant DAs as well as the other ADAs to make sure we're moving them up so we can recruit and retain great prosecutors, because we see things that happen, whether it's the Waukesha Parade massacre, and we have, frontline prosecutors that have been attacked in some of these areas, and we want to make sure that they have the support and resources they need to make sure things like that never happen. And I've had a lot of conversations with our legislators across the state, and I won't pretend to speak for them at this point, but I am cautiously optimistic that they see the public safety crisis that is brewing and that they're going to take steps when we make that.
Yeah, you got to be careful what you say, because you don't want, your opponent to take out some of the things you're saying, take them out of context, and use against them in a campaign ad.
That never happens.
No, it never happens. And by the way, the giving or getting a gift with batteries, it's like for the parents that I don't like or their kids that I don't like, when it's Christmas or their birthday, the kids are going, I just try to find a gift that needs like 12 D batteries. Such a jerk thing to do. I know. All right, so you decided this DA gig isn't for me, or I want to be Attorney General. How did that decision come? And how long did it take you from the first time you were thinking about running for Attorney General to actually, I'm doing this?
Being 28 when I got elected DA, people always, they'll come up to you and just assume like what's next or something like that. And for me, it's always, I had to have a reason to run for district attorney when I thought about it. And, seeing the crime and the issues, that was what made me get into the race for district attorney. And we had Brad Schimmel, who did an outstanding job for us as an attorney general, supporting law enforcement, prosecutors, and the rule of law. And we loved him across Wisconsin. And then we ended up with Josh Call in 2018 in that election. And it was just watching one failure after another. You could see it with Marcy's Law, where crime victim rights was expanded and he was missing in action on that. You could see how he was missing in action during COVID. You could see how he was missing in action in the worst possible way in the wake of the Jacob Blake shooting. In Kenosha. And that was what put me over the edge, because we saw Toney Evers condemn and convict a police officer with no facts. And then we saw our attorney general stay silent. Now, I've done officer-involved shooting investigations in the worst possible circumstances, when Trevor Casper, a 21-year-old state trooper, was shot and killed in Fond du Lac, giving his life to end that threat, and based on our investigation, saved lives that day. And I know how complicated they are. I know how much time they can take. And Josh Call, he was literally doing this investigation. He had more facts than the governor and the public. And he had to have known Jacob Blake was armed with a knife. And if he didn't, he was asleep at the wheel. And he should have forcefully pushed back and said, what the governor just told you is not true. There are more facts. We will protect the integrity of the investigation and remain calm. And instead, he said nothing that Sunday night. And then we saw what happened in the aftermath of that as Kenosha burned. And then what did Josh Call do? He effectively turned his back on our cops. And being in that law enforcement family and, worrying about my dad's safety when he'd get a page to go on a SWAT call as a negotiator, and when Officer Craig Burkholz with our city of Fond du Lac police department was shot and killed in 2011 on March 20th, that was when my dad was working, and I couldn't get a hold of him. I know what it's like to not know if my dad's alive, and to have an attorney general, that doesn't stand with our law enforcement. I could not believe that we would have a top cop that would effectively turn his back on our law enforcement. And that was what put me over the edge to really start having those conversations with my DA colleagues to say, hey, are you interested in running? Because if you are, I would be behind you. And some of those DAs that I really respected were supporting me out of the gates and saying that I should be the one to do this. And pretty humbling to have some of my colleagues that I really respect across the state telling me that, and just continue to have those conversations, kind of similar to when I was thinking about running for district attorney, because it wasn't just, I think I should do this. It's, am I the right person to do this? And my DA colleagues were the ones that I started with first, then started expanding out to our sheriffs and law enforcement and seeing if they were seeing the same things with Josh Call that I was seeing, and they were seeing it from a more up close than I was.
That has to be a tough position to be in. Josh Call, Democrat, Toney Evers, Democrat. and you see the governor, that press release and his statements within those 24 hours after that situation, and you were saying that, he stayed silent, and he should have said, or certainly could have said, actually, that's not all the facts. But it still is politics. You'd have to be in a tough, I'm just saying, I think that would be difficult to do. I'm not condoning that, clearly, but you're kind of calling out the governor. If you're in that spot and in 2 years, hopefully another one of these situations doesn't happen, but hypothetically it does. Michaels is the governor. Same scenario. You are now the attorney general, and Michaels says kind of similar, the same thing that Toney Evers would, which I wouldn't expect that to happen. But do you say something, or is it kind of, but I could say something, but quietly, like, call him up, Tim, seriously, dude. You don't do that. Yeah. Or is it, no, I'm making a public statement?
So, I can tell you with Tim Michaels, we've been building a nice relationship throughout, not just after the primary, but seeing each other at events beforehand and having those conversations where, and the thing that I think as others get to know Tim a little bit, they'll see that he's thoughtful and that he's willing to process and take in information and learn. And that's a fantastic thing for somebody running for governor, where what I would expect if we ever saw a circumstance like that, we'd be on the phone or in the room together talking it out, and we would never see a statement like that from Tim Michaels as our governor. And if we had a governor that, regardless of which political party, would say something like that, I'd be on the phone with them saying, you need to walk that statement back and say you were wrong, because if you don't, this is exactly what I'm doing. And then after you do that, we will make our statement and work together. Because when we're talking about public safety, we don't play politics with public safety. But unfortunately, that's what we've seen from Toney Evers, and that's what we've seen from Josh Call, and that's had a devastating impact on Wisconsinites, especially in southeast Wisconsin.
So now that you've won the primary, so Josh Call before, and I guess I didn't look, does he really do attack ads on you and Karen and Adam, or no, or go after you? Maybe not attacking, but you know what I mean. But now you're his opponent. Has he already started saying, well, here's why Eric Toney sucks? Has that started yet?
It did. So,
right.
My primary election week was a little more unique than every other candidate running for a statewide office, because I was in a hate crime homicide trial during the primary election. Oy. And so my election night was a little kind of wacky, because I had to get back to my trial the next morning, and that went through Thursday. And so after we won, and Josh Call issued a statement and he lied about me, and then the next day he issued another statement and lied about me, and it just shows the ineptitude of his campaign, where they can't even get their basic facts straight. And it shows the strength that my campaign has, that he's already running scared out of the gates.
What did he say? He said he lied about you. I didn't see those.
Yeah, so he issued a statement on a case that one of my assistant district attorneys handled, objecting to the bond that there was a $5,000 cash bond.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
So $5,000 cash bond was set at the initial appearance at the request of my prosecutor. And in this case, we actually worked ahead of time, because it was a counterfeit substance, because the drugs tested, field tested, I think it was negative or inconclusive for what we thought the drugs were to be. And instead of just releasing the guy to the warrant in Marathon County, we worked with the cops to get this counterfeit substance case filed and getting $5,000 cash bond.
Perfect.
So then I think it was after the preliminary hearing, so basically the arraignment, the defense asked for a signature bond, and the prosecutor objected to the signature bond request. The judge then at the end of the hearing ordered $500 cash. And what Josh Call and the ineptitude of his campaign doesn't recognize, that judges set bail, not prosecutors.
Everybody knows that, and he's the attorney general. He knows that too.
And that just shows the dishonesty of the campaign. And then the thing to really make it worse, he hired that prosecutor at the Department of Justice and is attacking his own assistant attorney general, somebody that he hired. And it's just an incredibly inept campaign right out of the gates.
You can't make that stuff up, man. Give me what else did he say, or is there another thing that, like, your campaign is going, we know he's going to go after us for this and this? That's just how it works. Now, let's just assume for a moment that they're actually, true. Or do you think this is mostly going to be stuff like you were just mentioning. Either
It's
taking
going to
things
be
wildly out of context, or it's going to be, no, that's just a flat out lie, man.
So one of the things is as I've traveled around Wisconsin, and I'm prosecuting more election fraud than anyone else in Wisconsin, and we're looking at another case that we might be filing here in the near future, where I'm going to do everything I can to defend the integrity of our electoral process and enforcing the rule of law. And we've seen that Josh Call and many on the left and the Wisconsin State Journal did such a dishonest editorial the Saturday before the election that after I read them the Riot Act for about a half hour, they had to take their editorial down and redo it because we've seen the facts don't matter.
Was that was that the one about texting or no? Was that the one?
No, that was
something else. I think that was also the Journal Sentinel. I don't think they like you very much.
The State Journal is one thing. The Journal Sentinel is another.
Oh, okay.
And I've been getting from the media, from the Journal Sentinel, the State Journal, the New York Times, the liberal media has been doing everything they can to try to carpet bomb me because they fear my campaign. And one of the things, as I prosecute election fraud, I fought to remove those WEC board members that broke our election laws in 2020. I even filed a complaint with the governor's office demanding that he remove some of them from office for breaking the law, and the governor didn't even bother to respond. And I think the reason he didn't respond is because he knows I'm right on the law, and he can't say I'm wrong on the law because then he'll look foolish, so he's just trying to ignore it. But when we look at, and I hear the discussion about decertifying the election, and I've probably been the most vocal Republican statewide candidate explaining why the law doesn't allow for that after reading Tim Ramtham's PowerPoint, reading the legal opinions, listening to some of the podcasts that support it, and explaining why we haven't had a court that's made some of these rulings. And if we were asking our legislature to simply do that and we have separation of powers, and they'd be taking that authority over from our judicial branch, then saying the legislature for any reason could do this. And I think back to 2016 when President Trump won Wisconsin, and if the Democrats were in charge of our legislature here in Wisconsin, as we saw the Russia investigation, that's exactly what they would have done. They would have needed no reason, no proof, no evidence. They could have just done it. And we have to make sure that we're following the rule of law. And I don't, some people, I understand why they feel that way, but the law doesn't allow for it. And I've been very vocal on this issue. And Josh Call is trying to suggest that I haven't been, because he wants to make this election about 2020, where we understand this election is going to be about his failures as our attorney general with public safety, refusing to enforce the rule of law, and playing politics with just about every across his desk.
You were mentioning, so you've gotten to know Michaels, and we saw in this last election, the primary, the former President Donald Trump, so he has endorsed Michaels, and obviously that it's shown all across the country so far. His endorsement means something. I don't know how much that plays into a general election, but certainly in a primary, because obviously a primary, Republicans are trying to separate themselves a little bit. So an endorsement from Trump, huge thing in terms of polling and your likelihood to win. General election, again, I don't know how much, because he's probably not going to endorse a Democrat. But with Michaels having Trump's endorsement, does that help or hurt you? With him having Trump, considering kind of what you're saying, that listen, I'm not going to decertify it because it's not my a personal opinion. I'm following the law here. Does that help or hurt Michaels having Trump's endorsement?
I'm not sure how that will play out in the general election. And I've been, 61 counties that I've visited, and I haven't been shy about this opinion. And I've had great conversations with people that I know disagree with me, but they've been willing to listen and say, okay, he's coming from a legal perspective. And that despite that, I won our primary, where people want someone that's going to tell them what the law is, be upfront, and not just tell them something that they want to hear. And that's what I've done as I've traveled all across Wisconsin. And what we need to do is, when we don't like the law, then we need to work with our legislature to change the law, and not have activist judges and not have an activist attorney general that will pick and choose when they'll enforce the rule of law.
Yeah, going back to when we do our Positive Tuesday shows, myself and Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald, we talk about that because, anything, if somebody gets arrested for, marijuana, or let's say it's a speeding or something, it's like, yeah, but here's the thing. It's still a crime if you have marijuana. Like, I don't make the law. You don't like it. Talk to your legislators and have them change it. But I'm the sheriff. We're law enforcement. That is literally what you pay us to do, is to actually do it, whether you agree with the law or not. But don't take it out on the cops. We got to follow the law. I'm sure there's a lot of cops that think marijuana legalized, I don't care. Fine, go ahead. But they don't look the other way when they see marijuana, because their personal feelings are, I think it should be legal. Yes, but it isn't. So you have to write the ticket. You have to do what you have to do. So I don't understand why we would expect anything less from an attorney general.
Well, and that's the reality. We don't pick and choose as prosecutors. I've never said we're just not going to enforce this statute. I mean, that's not our job. Right. Our job is to enforce the rule of law, and there's discretion that prosecutors have in how we resolve cases, what type of sentencing recommendation, times that we might not issue a case depending on the facts and circumstances. But we enforce the law, and Josh Call has time after time decided he's going to pick and choose when to enforce the law depending on the political winds at the time, and that's a significant failure of our Attorney General, especially as you look at our business community, farming community across Wisconsin. Consistency and predictability is so important so they can plan for the future if they're looking at investments, growing. And if you have an attorney general that's going to blow with the wind on what the law is, you can't do that. And that's why we're seeing millions of dollars invested out of our state at times, because we don't have that consistency and predictability. And when you enforce the rule of law, that brings consistency and predictability. And then if we don't like the law, we work with our legislators to try and change the law so we can get it to a place that we would like it to be.
So obviously with the election coming up, everyone's going to be focusing on, most people are going to be focusing on the governor's race. Totally get why. Absolutely. It's important for a lot of reasons, whichever way you decide to vote. At Dryden Wire, we were really focusing more on the attorney general's race. I mean, crime and court stuff, that's kind of that's what we're known for. That's our bread and butter. That's what we do our original articles on. Attorney general's race for us is like the governor's race for everybody else. But I don't think a lot of other people are attorney general. Like, I'm going to vote Republican or Democrat, or I really like Eric Toney, or I really like Josh Call. But I kind of feel like most people don't even really know that much about the attorney general's race. Why should people care about who's their attorney general in Wisconsin?
Well, I think we've seen some great examples over the 3.5 years that Josh Call has been our attorney general, where he's defunded prosecutors and DCI law enforcement officers from our Department of Justice. He's mismanaged our crime labs during a period of historic violence and drug epidemic, where he's taking in less items. He's testing thousands of less items and taking longer to do it in most categories. And he's picking and choosing when he wants to enforce the rule of law. And we need an attorney general that will actually enforce the law and defend what our legislature passes, because we also have a critically important Supreme Court race that's going to be coming up next spring that could further tip the balance of the court in a different direction. And that's why we need to make sure we have an attorney general that can actually defend what our legislature is passing and our governor is signing into law. Because if we don't have that, we know Josh Call is going to try and tear all of those things down. And I've had a number of people, they'll actually say they think the attorney general's race is more important than the governor's race. I don't know if I would go quite that far, but the attorney general has a significant amount of authority to defend the legislation that's passed, stand with our cops, and rein in some of these bureaucratic agencies that we're seeing run amok. And we see them trying to thumb their nose at Act 21 and the rulemaking process, and we need to make sure we're holding them accountable to the law and letting our legislature be the lawmaking body.
And I just thought of something. So, hygiene lab. You, as a district attorney, you're familiar with that. I just found out about it a couple days ago. Didn't even know it existed. Like, you hear the crime lab stuff, but there's a hygiene lab, and kind of find out that's really holding up a lot of stuff, like 6 to 9 months kind of a thing, where someone gets pulled over. I think the scenario was maybe that's heroin or fentanyl. Well, the district attorney, from my understanding, can't really prosecute someone unless they have that evidence, that blood draw. They have to send it to a hygiene lab, and it takes a long time to get that back. What is that? Does that fall under an attorney general's purview? Is that something that you can address, or no? That's not an attorney general thing. That's a completely separate thing.
We have to look at our crime labs and the hygiene lab almost in a similar context of with the issues that we're seeing. 6 to 9 months is spot on for what we're seeing. So if we have, if we're just looking to get alcohol in a blood test, the ethanol, that will come back in just a few weeks. Yeah. But then when we need a drug panel, because sometimes you'll have, the ethanol could be under the 0.8, or we, for whatever reason, need to know if there's drugs in their system as well. 6 to 9 months and that could be in a drug driving homicide. And I had one of those cases that we just resolved earlier this year, sending the person to prison for over 20 years that killed two people in a crash. And we waited 7, 8 months to get the drug panel back in that case before we could finally move forward. And the challenge with that is you've got a defendant that will be sitting in custody, hopefully on high cash in a circumstance like that. But then we have victims that are waiting for justice, that are every day living with the trauma of what happened with the court process hanging over them. And we have to streamline and improve that process and make sure that we have the resources and equipment in place to be able to do that. Because when you look at our crime labs, it was unconscionable of the mismanagement from Josh Call during the 2020-2021 period, because they're taking in less cases or items, and they're testing less and still taking longer to do it in many areas. And the reason that should be offensive to everybody in Wisconsin, they had more time to do testing because courts were effectively shut down in many parts of Wisconsin, especially in larger urban areas like Milwaukee that really drive the trials that we do. And the reason that matters, these crime lab employees, they have to drive from Wausau, Madison, or Milwaukee to testify in court. And if they're not traveling to testify in court, they should be in the lab testing. But they weren't because of the policies that Josh Call put in place, which reduced the effectiveness of what we were seeing from our crime labs. And that's on him, because we needed that evidence to identify suspects, to get cases moving, and to be able to do jury trials. And they should have been more efficient, but for his poor management.
So we're already getting up against our time, but we just had two questions come in, so I'll put those on the screen here. This one is from Gwen as AG. Will you be wanting to fill DCI agent positions in northern Wisconsin?
On day one, we're going to make sure that we are filling all of those positions. And I can't say we're going to simply fill them all on day one, because there's a process when you have to hire, but we're going to make sure that DCI...
There is a hiring process. It can't be
staff,
like you get a position and you get a position.
Yeah, but we have, we're not going to have trouble filling those positions, because I've had conversations with people in DCI, people that have left DCI, and they know the problems that Josh Call has brought. 88 out of, I think, 123 DCI positions, only 88 of them are filled, where he's reduced the resources to law enforcement across Wisconsin as we see historic violence and a drug epidemic. And it shows that public safety has not been Josh Call's top priority.
Yeah, and 100%. I love that question, Gwen, because DCI agents, and I'm sure they're vital in all areas and corners of our state, but in Northwest Wisconsin, when we don't have 100 cops in one county and local police departments with a chief and a full-time and a part-timer. DCI agents, man, again, they're very important everywhere, but they're especially important in rural Northwest Wisconsin, which is our area. So really, that's all we care about. I don't care about everybody else. If you guys down in South don't care about us, I've stopped caring about you. Just
but just the things that one DCI agent can do in an investigation aiding local law enforcement, especially huge. The smaller the agency, the more impactful a DCI agent can be because of the skill set that they bring to the table. And then, if you look at some of our police agencies in northern Wisconsin that might be a little smaller, you can imagine a case where a DCI agent is working with one of those investigators or officers, and what they'll learn from that agent that will spread throughout that entire agency, and just the impact they can have in a community is tremendous.
Yeah, DCI agents are legit. And here's a question from Kirk. Oh, Kirk, our friend. Where do you stand on constitutional carry and the Second Amendment? Kirk is also the mayor in St. Croix Falls, Wisconsin, in Polk County. So where do you stand on constitutional carry and Second Amendment?
Well, I support constitutional carry. I'm a lifetime member of the NRA. And, Josh Call, he put this big proposal out last year with the violence that we were seeing, and his proposal included red flag laws. He was trying to slip that through, understanding that there was no way that would ever make it through our Republican legislature, for good reason. And we have a law on the books right now, a Chapter 51 mental health commitment. I did a lot of those when I was in private practice. And that can have an impact on someone's Second Amendment rights, but you get due process. You get in front of a court commissioner or judge within 72 hours. You can have a jury trial within 14 days, and you have that due process. We have things in place that can, if there's an issue, that it can be addressed, but a lot of people don't use that process. It's just not something that gets used, and Josh Call just wants to restrict our Second Amendment rights. And to put this in perspective, If we rewind the clock to say last year, when Roe versus Wade is still the law of the land, many on the left would do everything they could to continue to expand abortion access because they viewed it as a constitutional right. But then you look to the Second Amendment, an enumerated constitutional right, and many of those same people on the left will do everything they can to trample, stampede, and overturn the Second Amendment because they don't like it. They want to pick and choose at the time what was a constitutional right. And now we know abortion is not a constitutional right, and they're still doing everything they can to try to overturn the Second Amendment, an enumerated constitutional right, and we must defend it. And that this is just the hallmark of the left. They pick and choose based on their political preferences, not the rule of law.
Yeah, I don't know how well you're going to do in this election. You're using like logic and law and facts, and I don't know how that's going to translate to votes, buddy.
Well, that's what we have to do, and we're going to hold the left accountable as they want to pick and choose and not enforce the rule of law. And when I go around Wisconsin, and I'll ask people who here, and I'll ask them to raise their hand, who thinks we should only enforce the rule of law when we agree with it? And I never see a hand go up. Never.
Of course not. Of course not.
And that's what Wisconsin, I believe, wants, is somebody that is going to enforce the rule of law, not just when it's popular. And sometimes the beauty of it, though, as a Republican and a conservative, the law almost always seems to go our way, and that's a nice advantage that we have.
Fair point. Well, so we're up against our time. There's a whole much more we can get to. You are certainly more than welcome to come back on before the election in November. But is there anything that you wanted to make sure we talked about that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
One of the things we hear people say, we're going to see a red wave in November, and we can't make assumptions. We have to make that happen. And that means we saw a historic turnout, a 40-year turnout in this Republican primary, and we have to continue that momentum through November. I've hit 61 counties as I've traveled Wisconsin, and that primary turnout was indicative of what I saw across Wisconsin. But we have to bring our friends out. We have to bring our family out, our like-minded people that we know, to make sure that we are getting to the polls and spreading the word, whether it's social media, talking, sending emails, text messages, and not taking this for granted. Anything that people can do to help get that message out, if it's the ability to donate, you can go to erictoney.com/donate and make a contribution to help make sure we can get our message out. But that grassroots support is what helped me win this primary election, because of that support across Wisconsin. And as I said at the beginning of the program, I'm still looking forward to earning the votes of those that didn't support me in this primary, including Adam, who was in your neck of the woods. And we had a really nice phone call that night, and he was incredibly gracious. And I'm looking forward to having a beer with him, although I understand his selection in beer, so I'm going to make sure I'm buying.
Yeah. Adam's my boy. I like him. I always have. He's outstanding. So you said erictoney.com/donate to donate, but I'm assuming if people just want to find out more about you, they can just go to erictoney.com, right?
Absolutely. And if you're on social media, Eric Toney WI, or Twitter, Eric J. Toney, you can see more there as well.
All right. So what's next coming up for you this week? Hopefully, like, the judge and the jury isn't waiting for you to be in court like 20 minutes ago, and you're like, hey, man, I got to be on Drydenway, so suck it.
Yeah, tentatively was going to be in a homicide trial next week, but we had a witness issue with the crime lab, so that got adjourned to a later date. But I'm still doing my day job, and really, really proud to do it. But it makes days a bit difficult. But it's been just great experience getting across Wisconsin, and as we see, it's not just when I see victims doing my job, but when I travel Wisconsin and I'll have a dad tell me that they lost their son to a fentanyl overdose, and that pain is real across Wisconsin. And we need an attorney general that's going to hold the Biden administration accountable for not enforcing our immigration laws. And that's exactly what I'm going to do as our attorney general.
Well, I do think it's a little bit humorous that they're starting to just bust a lot of these people to Washington, D.C. I just find that... I'm not saying I like it or I don't. I'm just saying I do. When I first read that story, it was a few weeks ago, I'm like, what? That's fantastic.
We have some creative people about it in many parts.
Yeah, it's easy to make decisions in Washington, D.C. when it's not in your backyard, but
that's true.
Now we're just there busting everybody up there. And yeah, I don't know if that's like the right answer there, but I do find it a little bit humorous. Eric, thanks so much for coming on, man. Absolutely appreciate it. was good getting to know you.
Thanks for having me, and looking forward to coming back on again soon.
Awesome. Special thank you to our guest today, Fond du Lac County District Attorney and Republican candidate for Wisconsin Attorney General Eric Toney, for joining us for a chat and taking some time so we can get to know him today. I'll see you next Thursday, August 25th, when Democrat candidate for Wisconsin's 28th Assembly District, Patty Schachner, will be joining us for a chat. For DrydenWire.com, I'm Ben Dryden. Thank you for watching, and have a blessed day.